Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Primetime News on TV1. I'm Charlotte Benedict for the Newsfirst team.
And I am Hashini Patharana. First up is a look at your headlines for tonight.
The headlines on Newsfirst.
How did the dollar drop overnight? Central Bank Governor clarifies sudden exchange rate adjustment.
අපි අන්තර්බැංක වෙළඳපොලේ යම්කිසි ආකාරයක විනිමය අනුපාතය අර තැනට ගැලපෙන ආකාරයට ඉදිරි ගෙනාට පස්සේ ඉන්ටර්බැංක් මාකට් එක ඇක්ටිවේට් වුණා අතර.
Central Bank raises policy interest rates by 1%. Verdict in 4 cases against Saranaguna deferred. Pavitra Vanyarachi appears before Illegal Assets Investigations Division. Government moves to introduce anti-defection law.
Taking a look at those stories in detail now, the Monetary Policy Board of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has decided to increase policy interest rates by 1 percentage point. The central bank stated that this decision was reached after a careful assessment of evolving domestic and global economic conditions as well as the outlook for the period ahead.
Meanwhile, the central bank has also taken necessary measures to contain the depreciation of the Sri Lankan rupee against the US dollar as part of its broader efforts to maintain stability in the foreign exchange market.
What has happened to the policy interest rate? The main factor that determines interest rates in the country's market is the policy interest rate set by the central bank. At present, the overnight market interest rate at which transactions take place between commercial banks and between banks and the central bank is considered the policy interest rate. This rate is decided once a month by the Monetary Policy Board of the central bank. At its meeting held yesterday, the board decided to increase the policy interest rate by 100 basis points or 1 percentage point, taking into account the domestic and global conditions that have emerged, particularly in light of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Accordingly, the overnight policy interest rate now stands at 8.75%.
If you look at the status of the economy up to now, we are seeing even the Q1 first quarter and second quarter of this year have been growing similar to the trend that we are seeing last 2 years, around close to 5%. We are seeing the economy has been moving, the activity has been growing around that level already by Q1 and Q2. So all the front external sector, the monetary sector, fiscal sector, and also growth have been moving in the right direction until this Middle East external shock came in and had some impact or going to have impact in our economy. That's why we are seeing the inflation has adjusted from around 2% to 5%. And exchange rate has some of the circulation plus some depreciation pressure already we are seeing. So as a result, I think when this shock comes into, external shock comes into, we need to have some adjustments. So this policy measure will certainly help the economy to adjust to face and maintain stability going forward. Still, next 2 quarters, our adjustment is our expectation that country will still be growing at a reasonable rate going forward. And there are also some depreciation currency that has already sharp adjustment has now stabilized. That will maintain. Also, that will help us to maintain inflation around target levels going forward. And also, there are some other measures government also took, and also we also taken some measures to curtail what we see. Not only the supply side shock has seen kind of a demand also have been moving in tandem with the recent trend. So I think this has to be curtailed to a certain extent. That doesn't mean there is a contraction, or this only will be a slowing down and curtailing the excess demand that also to prevent any overheating of the economy and balance the both inflation side, the demand side, and also growth and inflation.
Meanwhile, the Sri Lankan rupee, which had depreciated against the US dollar over the past few days, is now showing signs of strengthening. What measures did the central bank take to support this recovery?
My question is regarding the currency. Yesterday, the social media handles of the central bank put out a post calling the people not to be misled by comments being made on money printing and so on. I would appreciate, Dr. Nandalal, if you could set the record straight of what's actually happening with the currency. And also in the presentation by Dr. Patbegwia, there was a comment made that last week the banks moved away from the official rates that were issued for the currency. Has any explanation been given for that move away? Thank you.
What happened last week, especially before Friday, we have seen there was interbank market, that is a market between commercial bank, which usually with liquidity there has been improvement in the market. But beyond that, the bank and the customers, there's another market what we call weighted average interbank between commercial banks and the customers. There are two markets. Under normal circumstances, what we see if the interbank market rate is somewhere around say 320, then commercial bank rates for customers will be plus or minus depending on buying and selling. That is some spread between the interbank market rate. But we have observed because of some of the speculation, some of the panic by some people for imports and all these things, there was a excessive demand through speculation, and there was a transaction happening with commercial banks and the customers well above the interbank rates. That was what we saw as a distortion. So if there's interbank market rate is 320 and went up to 330, but outside the interbank market there was transaction happening last time of 354 and 346 as reported by the commercial bank transaction. So when you look at the interbank market rate and the commercial bank rate, it should have been in between, plus or minus, but moved away. So we took certain actions to bring back the normal situation. And as a result, and I think Friday, Thursday evening, we had a meeting with the treasurers and discussed, and also we brought some measures to stabilize the interbank rate around the buying and selling rates of the commercial bank. That settled the market, activated the interbank market, the liquidity and transaction in the spot market. That created kind of an environment that fully activated the interbank market that is in line with the other market. We have seen the market has stabilized, and now there's a good amount of liquidity in the market, and both importers and exporters and these exchange sellers and buyers are in the normal market condition that has settled.
The International Monetary Fund has set the 27th of May 2026 for its executive board to decide on the 5th and 6th review of Sri Lanka's extended fund facility program, a move that could unlock roughly $700 million in much needed financing. If the board approves both reviews, Sri Lanka will become eligible to draw the 6th and 7th tranches under the IMF arrangement. In Colombo, the central bank governor commented on the matter.
There's a flexibility for us to adjust targets depending on circumstances. If situation improves, there will be greater targets. If the situation will deteriorate, there will be another target. So it's all in consultation and taking into consideration, especially the global situation and its impact on the local situation.
Governor Dr. P. Nandalal Veerasinghe has asserted that the country remains in compliance with key International Monetary Fund program conditions, particularly on cost-reflective fuel pricing.
I think cost-reflective pricing condition has been met. So this board will approve the program day after 27th, and there's no issue with that. Obviously, there's some subsidy element of, I think, government already announced there's 100 rupees for diesel and 20 rupees for petrol. With that subsidy element, cost-reflective has been met for a period of time. This is not a fixed thing. Depending on the circumstances, IMF and also the government can negotiate and can have flexibility in the program. I don't think there's nothing called IMF recommendation under the program. This government should not give subsidies. There's nothing like that. If you look at even after DITRA, government has allocated additional 500 billion to support the recovery of the DITRA. So that's nothing, IMF also agreed. Even this kind of situation, IMF agreed to provide certain subsidies. And then we maintain cost-reflective with the subsidy. So that's there's nothing called, it's up to the governments, authorities to decide and justify why we need this kind of subsidies and what is the policy. And obviously cost-reflective is an important policy. It's good for the country that will be maintained going forward, even now.
During today's cabinet decision press briefing, journalists questioned the criticisms raised by the opposition regarding the Sri Lankan rupee.
රුපියල අප්‍රමාණයක් සමග විපක්ෂයේ චෝදනාවක් තිබුණා ආර්ථික කළමනාකරණයට මේ ආණ්ඩුව විපක්ෂයෙන් අදහස් ගන්නේ නැහැ කියලා. ආණ්ඩුව විදිහට මේ අපේක්ෂාවක් තියනවාද විපක්ෂයෙන් අදහස් ගන්න?
දැන් ඒ රුපියල අවප්‍රමාණ වුණු
Although the opposition got together and spoke like that during those few days when the rupee depreciated, that situation has changed now. I didn't see the opposition gathering to talk or issue press releases when the rupee was strengthening. The rupee did not strengthen because of their support, nor did anything happen to economic growth because of their support. Instead of deeply discussing anything about the country, its future or the economy, they just issue some statement to gain political mileage whenever something happens. We do not consider them to be a group that engages in deep discussions on these matters. In fact, from the very first moment this issue arose, the President as the Minister of Finance along with the team led by the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance and the team led by the Governor of the Central Bank constantly held discussions, predicted potential situations and intervened. So as you can see, we have achieved success there. Within a very short period, the rupee has once again become a strong currency. We have an understanding of the group that is trying to turn that brief situation into a political advantage. However, we carefully intervened in this issue with a clear plan, held discussions with any relevant teams and have brought the situation to a stable point. What we are currently doing is maintaining the stability and further strengthening the rupee. In reality, as you can see, this is less of an internal crisis within Sri Lanka and more of a pressure exerted on our currency by a global crisis, specifically the issue of rising oil prices.
විශේෂයෙන් තෙල් මිල වැඩිවීමේ ප්‍රශ්නයෙන් අපේ මුදල් ඒකමත ඇතුළත් තියෙන පීඩනයක්.
The Cabinet of Ministers has decided to implement the Sirasa Lanka National Energy Security Mission for the conservation of energy in the country.
අනපේක්ෂිත වියලි කාලගුණික තත්ත්ව
The energy security of our country has been challenged due to factors such as unexpected dry weather conditions, geopolitical instability causing intermittent disruptions in fuel supply and fluctuations in fuel prices in the international market. It has been identified that the additional pressure exerted on the national economy by the rising fuel import costs due to all these factors is further intensified by the irregular electricity consumption patterns of electricity consumers. Therefore, in order to properly manage this situation, it has been recognized that behavioral changes among the public are essential to raise energy consumption, efficiency and to shift electricity consumption as much as possible to time periods with higher renewable energy generation. To achieve these objectives, the Cabinet approved the proposal presented by the Minister of Energy to implement an integrated program named the Sirasa Lanka National Energy Security Mission in collaboration with all government institutions, state corporations, statutory boards, the private sector and the general public led by the Presidential Secretariat, the Ministry of Energy, the Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority and the Clean Sri Lanka Secretariat.
බලශක්ති අමාත්‍යතුමා ඉදිරිපත් කළ යෝජනාව අමාත්‍ය මණ්ඩලය අනුමත කළා.
Will fuel prices change again?
ඉන්ධන මිල ගණන් වල ඉහළ පහළ යාම විශේෂයෙන්
Regarding the ups and downs of fuel prices, a continuous increase in fuel prices is being observed, especially with the Middle East crisis. On the other hand, there are also fluctuations in our own fuel consumption. Therefore, as a country, when facing this situation, we absolutely have to purchase fuel even at a higher price. The government's expectation is to ensure the continuity of supply. Even during the past few months, we tried our best to ensure a continuous fuel supply to all these sectors. At such a time, as an unavoidable consequence, we have to purchase at higher prices based on the rates prevailing in the world market compared to ordinary times. Therefore, on one hand, instead of relying solely on fossil fuels, this Sirasa Lanka program is being implemented to focus more on renewable energy and to engage the public for a certain behavioral change in order to formally obtain the support of the general public who are the consumers.
වෙනසක් සඳහා ජනතාව මේකට සම්බන්ධ කර ගැනීම සඳහා වන වැඩපිළිවෙලක් තමයි සුරකිමු ලංකා හැටියට මේ ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙමින් පවතින්නේ.
Amid comprehensive explanations on the economy provided by the central bank governor as well as the cabinet spokesperson, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa reiterated today that the country's economy remains in crisis.
එතකොට එන්නෙන්නම
Fuel prices continue to rise, while the depreciation of the rupee has now shown some level of stabilization. At the same time, the dollar is also undergoing fluctuations. However, it is impossible to predict when and how sharply the currency could depreciate again, as the situation remains highly volatile. If we go back to June 2022, the period when the country went bankrupt, the price of 92-octane petrol was 470 rupees at that time, whereas today it is 410 rupees. If prices were to rise again from the current levels of 410 rupees, we could once again face the same situation we experienced in 2022. Looking ahead, the government is not openly discussing that the IMF agreement is set to end in March 2027. If remittances were to decline, if fuel prices were to increase, and if the rupee were to depreciate sharply, and if the IMF program ends by March 2027, then the country would face a significant risk situation.
2027 මාර්තු මාසෙ වෙනකොට IMF agreement එකත් ඉවර වුණොත් අපිට තියෙනවා ලොකු අවදානම් තත්ත්වයක්.
A government in any country exists to protect its people. That is its fundamental responsibility. Whether facing economic challenges, health crises such as pandemics, or any other form of adversity, a government must stand firm like a shield for its citizens. It is the duty of any administration to confront challenges and ensure a better quality of life for the people of the country. This principle applies to every nation recognized in the civilized world. However, it is regrettable that over the past several decades, successive governments in Sri Lanka have acted in a manner completely contrary to this responsibility. When disasters or crises arose, those in power often acted with the intention of turning those hardships to their advantage. Rather than protecting the people, the focus shifted elsewhere. Let us look back at the past. Do you remember the tsunami that struck more than 20 years ago? Over 35,000 people lost their lives and around 5,000 went missing. The rulers at the time turned that tragedy into an opportunity for gain. In the end, the Helping Hambantota controversy remained one of the most talked about outcomes. Funds that were meant to rebuild destroyed homes, bridges and hospitals did not deliver the intended impact. Some tsunami-displaced families remain displaced even today. Then came the Easter attacks, which were used for political advantage. The COVID-19 crisis followed, claiming lives. Those in power utilized quarantine hotel allocations for associates, effectively profiting while people struggled. There were also delays in procuring vaccines. Allegations surrounded the procurement of COVID-19 test kits. Favoritism appeared widespread. A national crisis was turned into an opportunity for business. Then came the economic crisis. Questions remain over whether the final $500 million in reserves was used to settle sovereign bonds in a manner influenced by commissions. These remain critical concerns. Ultimately, the country collapsed under pressure. Next, consider the fertilizer crisis. An overnight ban on chemical fertilizer and a rushed shift to organic alternatives created further turmoil, with allegations that these developments were exploited for gain. There were controversial deals involving so-called nano-fertilizer and payments linked to rejected shipments. Do you recall the garlic, sugar, and coconut oil transactions that caused significant losses to the country? Do you remember substandard fuel imports damaging vehicles, or substandard gas imports that led to explosions and loss of life? By December 2021 alone, 847 gas-related incidents had been reported across the country. 7 innocent lives were lost that year due to such incidents. It was, once again, a case of business amid crisis. That is how governance functioned at the time. Further, the data system of the National Medicines Regulatory Authority, which oversees drug quality, was erased. Substandard medicine was subsequently imported. Under the law, no medicine or medical equipment can be manufactured or imported without registration and approval from the authority. However, exceptions could be made only under extraordinary circumstances, such as emergencies, epidemics, or national security needs. Those powers were misused. In 2021 alone, 207 waivers were issued to bypass proper registration for medicines and equipment. An Indian credit line of $200 million was provided to address drug shortages. Yet, substandard medicines imported under this mechanism allegedly led to serious consequences, including deaths. Some individuals reportedly suffered permanent blindness due to defective medication. This reflected how the public was sacrificed while profit was prioritized. The power entrusted by the people for their protection was instead used without regard for human life. It was this very group that people rejected through mass public protests, famously known as the Aragalaya. Forces that profited from people's suffering and even in death are now attempting to regain influence in different forms. They question whether the current government has delivered what they themselves failed to even attempt when in power. Those raising such concerns are described as individuals linked to misuse of power and financial gain. Some among them have even been identified by Supreme Court rulings as contributors to the country's economic collapse. There is a belief among them that adopting new appearances can mislead the public once again. But the people of this country are not deceived. The people are alert.
The Colombo High Court today ordered the postponement of the verdict for 4 cases filed by the Bribery Commission against former Deputy Minister Sirasa Gunawardena over corruption allegations, rescheduling it for the 9th of June.
The verdict of the cases was scheduled to be delivered today. However, Colombo High Court Judge Mohammed Mihail stated that since the verdict is not yet ready, it will be announced on the 9th of June. The Bribery Commission has filed these 4 cases against Sirasa Gunawardena, alleging that he caused a loss to the government when acquiring vehicles on a rental basis for the National Lotteries Board, while serving as its chairman in the year 2006. Meanwhile, several former ministers and MPs had been summoned before the Illegal Assets Investigation Division and the Criminal Investigation Department today. Former Minister Pavitra Vanniyarachi, who appeared before the Illegal Assets Investigation Division today, had her statement recorded for several hours. This was in connection with an ongoing investigation regarding her assets. Meanwhile, former Minister Johnston Fernando has requested an alternative date to appear before the Illegal Assets Investigation Division. The former minister was summoned there regarding an investigation into an incident of providing a vehicle on a rental basis to an individual named Sampath Manamperi. Additionally, it is reported that former Putlam District SLPP Member of Parliament Chintaka Maya Dunne and former Nawalpitiya Mayor Amal Priyankara have also requested alternative dates to appear before the Legal Assets Investigation Division. They were summoned there to record statements regarding investigations being conducted into their assets. Meanwhile, Samgi Janabalawegya Member of Parliament Mujibur Rahman appeared before the Criminal Investigation Department today. This was to provide a statement regarding an investigation into an alleged telephone conversation held with an incarcerated inmate.
The Cabinet spokesperson revealed today that they expect to urgently present a bill to Parliament to abolish the parliamentary seats of members of Parliament who cross over to other parties after being elected by public vote.
Regarding the economic management, I have noticed people saying here and there that this person or that person is being taken in. First of all, I would like to state that the people of this country elected a new parliament in November 2024. They elected 159 members to the ruling party and another group to the opposition. We respect that public mandate. Therefore, we have no desire or intention to take anyone currently in parliament from the opposition into the ruling party. Even if some individuals have such desires or claim upon waking up from a dream in the morning that they too were contacted, while they may have such aspirations, we have absolutely no expectation of taking anyone from the opposition over to the government side. Not only that, we also expect to urgently present a bill to Parliament to abolish the parliamentary seats of those who switch parties against the public mandate. There are people who may have worked with various parties in the past and held different political views, but sincerely wish to work for the country, and they are currently serving in various positions within the public service. We will not hesitate to utilize their services to operate the state mechanism.
के सेवाව राज्‍ය ආන්ත්‍රණය ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම සඳහා ගන්න පැකිලෙන්නේ නැහැ.
The Colombo Crimes Division informed the Fort Magistrates Court today that assistance has been sought from the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI, to unlock the mobile phone of Kapila Chandrasena. Now, investigating officers stated that the request was made by email and that further action regarding the mobile phone will be taken based on the instructions received.
The magisterial inquiry into the death of former Sri Lankan Airlines Chief Executive Officer Kapila Chandrasena continued for a fifth day today before Colombo Fort Magistrate Pasan Namarasena. Two witnesses appeared before court today, and after recording their testimony, investigating officers informed court that President's counsel Rianziar Sugularatna and his junior counsel had been requested to appear to provide further evidence. Investigating officers stated that the two lawyers were unable to appear in court today due to official court duties and requested that summons be issued for them to appear on a future date to record their statements. The magistrate stated that testimonies from 18 individuals have already been recorded as part of the inquest. Emphasizing that no summons had been issued to previous witnesses to appear before court, the magistrate questioned why a different approach was being sought in this instance. In response, investigating officers said that the two lawyers had indicated that they would appear to give evidence if summons were issued. The magistrate ruled that since 18 witnesses had appeared before court and testified based on requests made by investigators without formal summons, the same procedure should be followed for these witnesses as well. Accordingly, the magistrate rejected the request to issue summons to President's counsel Rianziar Sugularatna and his junior counsel who had provided legal representation to Kapila Chandrasena. Meanwhile, Indika Ratnayaka, who had stood as a surety to secure bail for Chandrasena, testified before court today. His testimony revealed that Chandrasena had informed him, even before getting remanded, to be prepared to act as a bail surety. Extract of witness statement.
I cannot recall the exact date, but around late February or early March, Mr. Kapila called me and said, Indika, I need a big favor. I may need you to stand surety for my bail. Please be ready and arrange the necessary Gramaniladhari certificates. I followed his instructions and prepared everything. On the 5th of May, I saw that he had been granted bail. I then contacted attorney at law Udara and said I was ready to stand surety. He asked me to come to court, and I signed for a personal bail for 10 million rupees. After completing that, I left court. On the 7th of May, Mr. Aravinda called me and asked me to come and meet a lawyer. I went to his residence, and then Mr. Aravinda, his wife, Chamil, Shanta, Ferdi, and I travelled in his vehicle to meet the lawyer. After the meeting, we returned to his house. Dinner had been prepared there. Mr. Kapila also came to the dining table. After dinner, I left. The next morning, on May 8th, I saw in the news that Mr. Kapila had passed away.
Following this testimony, statements were also recorded from electrician Hemantha Samankumara, who had arrived to install CCTV cameras at the residence of Aravinda De Silva. The inquiry is scheduled to resume on the 29th of May.
The United States said it launched new strikes on southern Iran on Monday, targeting Iranian missile sites and boats attempting to place mines.
Well, Shalan, today Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, said it had downed a US drone and fired at a fighter jet and another drone that entered Iranian airspace. Now, in the midst of these developments, Beijing has also urged Tehran and Washington to observe the ceasefire.
We now cross over to Stevin Machado for more details. Stevin?
Yes, thank you, Charlene and Hashini. Now, in the latest developments, Iran's Deputy Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, Ali Bagheri, arrived in Russia to attend a Moscow security forum. Now, Iranian state media reported that Bagheri is scheduled to deliver a speech at the conference and hold meetings with senior Russian political and security officials. Now, the International Security Forum is Russia's most important annual event. in the field of regional and global security, held with the participation of officials from various countries and international organizations. Now, meanwhile, Hezbollah says it confronted the Israeli enemy army near the town of Zaltar al-Sharqiya that overlooks the Litani River in the province of Nabatea in southern Lebanon. The group said it is targeting Israeli positions along the river and near the town of Yama al-Shakif with rocket salvos and artillery fire. Let's take a closer look at more details.
The US military said it launched a series of strikes in the Strait of Hormuz on Monday as an Iranian delegation led by top officials traveled to Qatar to hold negotiations to end the US-Israel war on Iran. The United States Central Command claimed it carried out the self-defense strikes to protect US troops from threats posed by Iranian forces. However, it did not provide details about the strikes and their locations. Iranian media reported explosions in Bandar Abbas, some 70 kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz in southern Iran. Iran's foreign ministry has released a statement accusing the US of breaching the ceasefire agreement with aggressive acts in Iran's Hormozgan region, where Bandar Abbas is located. In a statement shared by Iran's IRIB broadcaster, the ministry said the action showed the US government's malice and hypocrisy towards Iran. The statement said that Iran will not hesitate to defend itself. Beijing has urged Tehran and Washington to observe the ceasefire. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning told a news briefing that China urges the parties concerned to fulfill their ceasefire commitments, resolve disputes through peaceful means, and promote the early restoration of peace. Iran's Tasnim news agency has quoted a source close to Iran's negotiating team as saying $24 billion of frozen Iranian assets must be released in any potential deal with the US. The source said Tehran's position is that half of the amount, $12 billion, must be released when an MOU is signed, with the remaining released within 60 days. Tasnim said Iran's top negotiator Mohammad Baghar Ghalibaf travelled to Qatar to reach an agreement on a mechanism to implement this demand. The US and Iran agreed to a ceasefire on the 8th April, but a lasting peace has yet to take hold, with negotiations and de-escalation efforts still underway. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has been on a 4-day visit to China, during which he and Army Chief Field Marshal Azim Munir have held talks with President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang. After pushing China for weeks to take on a more active role in convincing Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, the Trump administration said before the summit that it did not need Beijing's help. Early on Monday, a high-level Iranian delegation arrived in Qatar's capital, Doha, to discuss roadblocks to a permanent peace deal. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said a potential deal to end the US-Israel war on Iran could take a few days as a series of attacks threatened an already fragile ceasefire.
The straits have to be open. They're going to be open one way or the other. So they need to be open. What's happening there is unlawful, it's illegal, it's unsustainable for the world, it's unacceptable. I don't know of any country in the world that does it. The Russians are not in favor of a tolling system. The Chinese are not in favor of a tolling system. I mean, there's no country in the world that's in favor of a tolling system except the regime in Iran. So that's not acceptable. That cannot happen. The straits need to be open, unimpeded, without tolls, and obviously that needs to happen immediately as soon as anything's agreed to.
Well, look, I think our position is well stated. The president had a very important, I think, historic call just a couple days ago with a number of leaders from the region. I think there's strong alignment and agreement on what a preliminary draft should look like. I think that, like anything with something like this, and it's going to take a couple days to settle on, even down to the disagreements over a word, sentence. So we'll have to work through that. If there's going to be a deal, we're going to have to work through that. But this is, it's either going to be a good deal or there isn't going to be one.
Now, from more news from overseas, the foreign ministers of Australia, India, Japan and the US agreed to jointly build port in Fiji and signed pacts covering critical minerals and energy security as they sought to inject fresh energy into their grouping, known as the Quad. Let's take a look.
The
brief meeting with the country's top diplomats, Australia's Penny Wong, India's S. Jaishankar, Japan's Toshimitsu Motegi, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, was the third such gathering of the Quad since September 2024. The group unveiled its first joint infrastructure project, a port in Fiji. Rubio said, quote-unquote, "We are going to be partnering on issues of port infrastructure, in particular in response to insufficient port capacity in the Pacific Islands. We are announcing plans to work with Fiji," unquote. The four-nation group had lost some momentum last year after failing to hold a leaders' summit amid tensions between US President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi over Washington's tariffs and other matters. He said the group agreed to launch an initiative on Indo-Pacific energy security and a critical minerals framework.
Weather first.
The Department of Meteorology says that the southwest monsoon has now completely established across the island.
We are now ready to take a look at the upcoming weather conditions with Viara Virakun bringing us all the details. Viara?
Yes, thank you, Hashini and Shala. Now, in your latest weather update coming from the Department of Meteorology, as you can see, the southwest monsoon has established over the island. Now, accordingly, showers and thunder showers can be expected over western Sabaragamuwa, northwestern Gaul, Mathura, Kandy and Nuwara districts. Now, at the same time, fairly heavy falls above 75 millimeters are likely at some places in these areas. At the same time, showers or thunder showers may occur at a few places in Uva province and in Ampara and the Batticaloa district. Now, also, according to the Department of Meteorology, fairly strong winds of about 30 to 40 kilometers per hour can be expected at times over the western slopes of the Central Hills, northern, north central, northwestern and southern provinces and in the Trincomalee district. Now, as always, the general public is kindly requested to take adequate precautions to minimize damages caused by temporary localized strong winds and lightning during thunder showers. Is now shifting your focus to sports news. Now, taking a look at your sports arena tonight, we have the latest coming in from a sport that we all are enthusiastic about, which is cricket. Now, the Sri Lankan national cricket team is set to depart the island today for the West Indies to take part in a multi-format series. The tour will feature all formats including Test, One-Day Internationals and T20Is. Now, the Sri Lanka squad for this series was announced yesterday.
The Sri Lanka tour of the West Indies will feature 2 test matches, 3 one-day internationals and 3 T20 internationals. Kusal Mendes will captain the Sri Lanka side in both the ODI and T20I formats, with Kamandu Mendes serving as vice captain. Meanwhile, the test squad will be captained by Dhananjay De Silva, while Kamandu Mendes has also been named as deputy captain of the Red Ball side. The series will get underway with the first ODI scheduled to be played in Kingston on the 3rd of June. The T20 international series will run from the 12th of June to the 15th, while the test series is set to begin on the 18th of June.
And that's a wrap of Primetime News on TV1 for tonight.
Thank you for watching.
Good night.